there are a whole lot of things that people need deliverance from, compassionately, hopefully. One of them being Kabbalah tree programming. Now, I'll just give this little bit, and then I really want to get into this conversation with you, knowing that I actually haven't fully talked about with you everything you know about this, and I know you know a lot about it. And we've been sitting on some stuff that we've discovered, and I'm excited just to have this conversation for a little while.
Okay.
You know, but you know, just getting into this, Kabbalah happens to be a component of Jewish mysticism. Essentially, it's a branch, a way of studying Torah for some groups, and there are all kinds of things that relate to what has been derived from that system of study and called the Kabbalah tree. And so, in any case, Kay, what is your experience with this? How have you run into it? And what have you learned?
Wow. All right. So Kabbalah is, so Jewish mysticism, but it's really a perversion. In a way, it's an attempt to try and explain God. Who we can't put God in a box. He doesn't fit in a box, right? So any attempt to do that is going to be perverted. Kabbalah is very deeply associated with Freemasonry, with Rosicrucianism, which is also tied in Freemasonry. And I find, especially with SRA survivors, especially if they have any Hebraic or Jewish roots, and ritual abuse was part of their experience, frequently they will have Kabbalah programming. What I've seen is, for those, I actually have some slides if you want, I can share that with you.
You can actually do that with a screen share, and it'll come right up in the interview. People that are watching this on YouTube will see the slide. Feel free to do that.
All right. All right. So I'm gonna actually go back to an earlier slide here. All right. So Kabbalah is a false tree of life. So this is a picture of a Kabbalah tree. What I found is that for survivors that have this programming, especially if it's trauma-based, is that this gets superimposed over the physical body, and there would be altars that would represent each of the circles or sephirot. So you can see at the top there, the kether that represents the crown. Bina and Hokmah are the ears. Geburah and Hesed, those are Hebrew for the shoulders. Tefreth is the heart. The Had and Netzah are the hips. Yesod is the genitals, and Malkut is the feet. And Dat is about this area right here in the body. So what I learned, I went to a seminar by Steve Ogilvy one time on deprogramming for Kabbalah, and he believed that many survivors, they start at the point of birth, and I believe this was true for me, creating trauma that will therefore generate an altar for each of these areas of the body, each of 3 months up to 2 years of age. So they would start with the crown, bonk on the head that would create severe trauma, and then the concept is if baby lives, then they're strong, they deserve to live if they live, and demonic is put in with that trauma, and there's like a crown And so the crown kind of floats between the skull and the brain, and control is the occult version of it is that it then controls the mind, will, and emotions in the head. Next, so birth is the crown, 3 months would be the heart. So on through to death. And death is really where it's a ball of Luciferian light, which is supposed to be the culmination of and the connecting point from all of the trauma areas to this Luciferian light here. So when I do deprogramming for this, I break the program at each point in the body, call forward the altars for healing, and you'll have to remove the demonic associated with each of those areas. Usually, especially trauma-based, it's very severe trauma. I've also found that these points intersect with chakras and become like a power grid system. So you have essentially Kabbalah, and it doesn't, like Kabbalah rituals, if that's going on with the group that did this, they don't stop at 2 years of age, they continue. So you may find that you could have 10 little girls that are Teferet inside because every year they reinforced or reiterated the programming. Interesting on the ears, Bina and Hokmah, what we find with a lot of survivors is they have trouble hearing God because the trauma's been done to the ears so that they only hear the false God that was brought in with the Kabbalah. So it can have a dramatic impact. And those altars, Bina and Hokmah, will then try and hold back the truth of God, or the wisdom, the true revelation of God gets like pressed back by these altars. So they will only hear what the occult wants them to hear. The other point on that is, even though the eyes aren't mentioned here, all survivors that I've worked with have had trauma with the eyes as well, about seeing and hearing. So, these circles are called Sifro, or Sifrat, depending on how you pronounce it. And then there are 22 lines, and they're all in Hebrew. Those are supposed to be the paths of life that intersect the Sifro. And each of the Sifro are supposed to represent a characteristic or quality of God. So SRA survivors have these altars that correspond with the Sifro at each point in the body. So in breaking the programming, we want to break the ritual. We want to break the program that was performed at each point, get the demonic out, integrate the parts, but we also need to release the healing of God, and then to shut down, essentially, this is like a power grid in the body. We want to shut down that power grid. This is kind of another picture of it. I don't know how clear that's coming through, but kind of an explanation of these things. Now, for SRA survivors, let's talk about the feet. A lot of SRA survivors, really don't like anyone to touch their feet, or their feet hurt. There's a lot of programming that happens with the feet. So it might not just be the Malkut or kingdom, but like this little piggy went to market. So they will overlay. Do you remember with the little pig, the toes?
I remember.
Yeah, and so they will overlay both the Kabbalah and other like nursery rhymes and programs on top of that. And then so here's the chakras in the body, and what happens is the Kabbalah lines up with the chakras, and then the body becomes a temple. And each point of the body has been dedicated to these demonic forces. So it's no wonder a lot of people have a lot of physical illness where these parts of the body have been dedicated as distribution centers for demonic energy. And then here, I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is kind of where in occultism, they correlate the points of the body. The left side is considered feminine, the right side is considered male, the center is considered neutral, and they correlate it with tarot and astrology, and they just mix and match a bunch of things in there. So, but that's just some of the information on that. And then what happens is the survivor becomes a psychic connection and becomes like a human energy portal. And what we want to do, of course, is clean that up. We don't want to be human power grids. We want to be only connected to Christ. So the healing process, of course, each of those things that I've just mentioned. But in that process, going back to the new wineskin, we have to be very careful, because if it's trauma-based Kabbalah programming, man, those are death-defying rituals where people almost died. Like a lot of times, Teferet with the heart, people will report, oh my, it feels like there's an elephant on my chest. Well, they stop baby's heart. Baby turns blue. And then they resuscitate and say, oh, this false god saved your life. So we have to be particularly sensitive to the emotional and trauma content of those memories. Those are big. And I guess the best way I can recommend doing that is have your survivor kind of picture putting the trauma memory on a DVD, supernaturally download it on a DVD and give it to Jesus, so they don't have to walk through all that trauma, but acknowledge that the trauma is there, the memory, and give it to him. So, but sometimes it'll take me 2 or 3 sessions to really carefully get this broken, especially for older survivors. But boy, we have seen tremendous physical healings, emotional healings. People start to emotionally grow up and mature. Physically, they start getting healthier as we break this stuff. I also believe that there's a cosmic component to it as well. I think that not only does a person become a human power grid with the chakras and the Kabbalah points, but then those get connected to second heaven, and that needs to be shut down as well.
That is so good and succinct. You brought up so many really, really important points on this, in the truth that, Kabbalah programming is a real thing that a number of survivors are going to have to be delivered from, without question. And what we found is that when you mentioned, the cosmic thing, we ran into that in a big, big way. And this is something that I haven't ever really publicly shared before on this podcast. This is the first time that I'm even talking about this. But we ran into this cosmic thing, and I don't even know, it was probably almost a year from the time that I first began to run into it until I even had language for what we were dealing with. It's like a year. I'm like, I was calling it the template. And I didn't know what the template was. I was just like, what is this template? And how are they plugging people into this? What is its pattern? But I began to recognize, so then it showed up with different people at different times under different circumstances in different points. And it's such a bird's eye that it's just, all I could do is scratch my head and just be like, I don't know what this is. And there were times where I would try to pray into certain things with people, different ways and whatever. And if it was the template, it never worked. It just didn't work. I was getting zero breakthrough. And I know that you know how frustrating that can be as a minister, because your heart's like, I just want these people to be free. Jesus, just free. You have all authority in heaven and earth. Just do it. And you're like, pray this and pray that. And what about this? And then you just invent words like, what about this word? Is that it? No. So I would run into the template and I'll just be like, no, not again. And, so we try some different things. So after a year goes by, periodic, maybe once a week or every 3 weeks, or, I'm just running into something like this. It clicked and we began to get the data, and it basically worked out to that there's this cosmic tree it seems to be plugged into Lucifer's iniquity. Like that's what it seems for what we ran into. It's like, it's like
very Luciferian.
His iniquity is what the tree plugs into in the heavens. And then we found that people were being plugged into different points in this cosmic tree. And so it would work out to basically portals like doors. And when they walk into this realm, because each point would open up like a realm, the arms would be like swinging rivers or roads, but it's like it could take different shapes and forms because it's multidimensional. And even like if you look at the top of the tree on the illustration, you can overlay that on a Metatron's cube, which is a sacred geometry. It's like that sacred geometry is the top of this so-called Kabbalah tree that they've come up with called Jewish mysticism, which anyway, but we would go in and we would find that we were like entering these doors, and it's like, oh, there's all, when we went into the crown, Kether or whatever, it's like, oh, there's all these world rulers in here. We know you from the news. We've seen you on they're like all hanging out in there. And I remember one of the first days that we actually got someone set free from this thing. The world rulers were like in the spirit sitting there watching them leave. And they're like, how'd you get out of here? And it was like, we got it. And, so there was like, the programming interface with the physical body. And then we started running into this guy. And, the different points for us would mean different things. Like the Tiferet or Tiferet, whatever, seemed to be like Tiferet, like a bloodline convergence agenda, which connects somehow into like a portal of death. And some of these things I don't fully understand yet, Kay. So I'm saying this, saying, everyone listen to me with a grain of salt here. We don't fully understand everything. But we were able to articulate a prayer that I haven't released publicly yet